It's thinking, Ron. Is it there? You tell me.
I think we're live, Tina. I think the internet
Yours goes
messed up
live.
its pants.
Yours goes live before mine does every single time. Wait.
Yeah, no, I know. It's because I told you the internet starts at the Pacific Ocean and then it travels. That's why, like, Graham probably doesn't know. He's out east, so he probably doesn't know that we're online yet.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Tina-Desiree Berg. Welcome to this afternoon's live broadcast for Status Coup. It is October the 20th, 2020. Lots to talk about today. We have two comedians with us today, not one, but two, so this should be a good time. So welcome, Graham Elwood. Glad to have you joining us. And, of course, my co-host, Ron Placone.
Nailed it. You crushed it. You always nail it. Thank you. Good to be here. What's up, Graham? Good to see everybody. The year is 2022, but 2020 was a good one. So we'll
Yeah, October 20th, 2022.
I mean, I get it. Say that 5 times fast. You can't, you know. I mean, that'll totally throw you. And sometimes I have 2020 flashbacks just on the regular, where I just think it's 2020.
Well, you know, Bernie Sanders is coming to town. He's going to be campaigning with Karen Bass at the end of the month. That's a flashback to 2020.
That is a 2020-esque thing to have happen, yeah. So we're just living in 2020 here in California. We party like it's 2020 out here.
That's going to be great. I hope there's riots and stuff like 2020. That'll be fun.
Indeed. All right. So a couple of things I want to mention. We're going to talk about AOC being heckled, not once, but twice now. There are some various elements to that. Tina Forte supporters were in the crowd. Some crazy behavior there. Also, right-wing insanity report. We are going to have that directly after at 5 p.m. Eastern. This week on the show, I have Andy Campbell as my guest. Andy is the senior editor for Huffington Post, and he has a book that just came out, We Are Proud Boys. I'm going to play a little clip of that now. And and we've seen it not just in Portland, but everywhere where local law enforcement do turn their backs on the Trump supporters and fire, less lethals, not just tear gas, rubber bullets, whatnot, into BLM or anti-fascist protesters. I've seen that so many times.
The issue is that even today, following January 6th, you have law enforcement that doesn't know what to do when it finds out it has a Proud Boy within its ranks. That's right. Last week in Chicago, they just announced that a Proud Boy officer won't be penalized because it's not illegal to be a Proud Boy. When, again, this is an issue of discrimination. Functionally, in the street, a Proud Boy cop is no different than a Nazi cop because they still believe that, political violence against the left is in their rule set. They have white supremacist tenets. And so what is that? How is a black person going to see justice when a Proud Boy cop is on the other end of a gun? I mean, that's just not going to happen.
All right, so join us at 5 directly after this live broadcast, maybe a little bit later than 5, depending on how late we go here, for an hour-long interview with Andy Campbell, and his book is We Are Proud Boys. All right, so to start the show off, I wanted to talk with you two about some recent polling that's coming out. We're headed into the midterms, 3 weeks away. If you're in California, ballots have been mailed. Other parts of the country, they've been mailed too, if they do mail-in ballots. So campaigning's going on and there's polling going on. I wanted to talk about two specific polls that came out this week. The first one, believe it or not, is in Teen Vogue. It's a crazy upside-down world when Teen Vogue is doing better political journalism than most mainstream media outlets are, but this is where we're at. So I wanted to bring this up. Young voters approve of Democratic policies but don't credit the party. Teen Vogue and Change Research find. I want to talk about this because there's a lot of takeaways here. It won't be surprising to either of you that there's a disconnect between the Democratic Party and young voters. That's been going on for a long time. My question is going to be, after looking at this, whether it's a messaging problem or a Democratic Party priority problem. All right, so welcome to the second installment of Teen Vogue and Change Research midterms vibe check. With early voting underway in many states and Election Day just weeks away, we surveyed 1,173 registered voters under the age of 35 to get their thoughts on the direction of the country. All right, so let's scroll down because I want to look at some of the questions. All right, so the section Democratic policies and legislation are popular among young voters. Recent Democratic accomplishments are popular with young voters, with one of the major ones being student loan debt forgiveness. 2/3 of surveyed voters support the Biden administration's forgiveness plan, and 40% of voters say student debt forgiveness has made them more supportive overall of Biden and the Democratic Party. Among respondents, the most popular proposals are new measures in the Inflation Reduction Act that cap Medicare copays on insulin, extend health insurance premium subsidies, and allow Medicare to negotiate lower drug prices, with 80% of surveyed voters saying they totally support these actions. All right off the top, I understand why there's a disconnect. Number one, yes, they're going to be excited about the fact that there is some student debt for forgiveness, but the criticism, in my opinion, is going to come for the fact that they didn't forgive all of it, and that it was means tested and it was capped. Thoughts?
Well, I mean, it's both. I mean, the Democratic Party, first of all, its policies. I mean, what policies has it actually enforced and passed that have helped anybody's lives, let alone young voters? So the Democratic policies are usually just sort of left-leaning lip service. You know, they just kind of say stuff and go, yay, but they never really act on it. When they're in power, like, they are right now, the Democrats control the Senate and the White House and the Congress. Now they say, oh, we don't control the Senate because Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, who are Democrats, who ran as Democrats, and we were all told vote for any blue, and this is what we get. So the Democratic Party is so disconnected on so many levels, not to mention you've got, there's such a youth movement at the top of that party with young, spry Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi. These people are old and out of touch. They have been in the pampered DC Beltway inner circle for decades. They have no idea. I mean, Joe Biden, there was a clip that was going around during the Democratic primary where he's like, oh, young people today, I have no sympathy. I don't want to hear it at all. And so, and then when they do this like student debt forgiveness, it's just to hope to kind of trick young people into thinking, oh, the Democrats care. And then you look deep, it's only 10 grand. They can't even get that done. Like, it's always just window dressing. Yeah. So they're not going to bridge this gap because young people don't watch CNN and MSNBC, and young people are the ones waking up. They're the ones on social media. They're the ones who, when Roe v. Wade got overturned, were the ones in the streets and saying in interviews and on social media going, the Democratic Party could have codified this decades ago, and they didn't. Right. So I don't see the Democratic Party, unless it does a complete overhaul, which it's not going to do, because then it would give up its huge donor base. So it's going to just be the party of liberal elites, and it's not going to connect with kids at all.
So, yeah.
I mean, I thought
for
sure. I was pretty sure when I saw Joe Biden licking an ice cream cone and wearing aviation shades, I was like, oh yeah, he's hip to the rhythm of the youth. This is going to resonate big time. But then nothing really materialized. And to kind of echo some of what Graham was saying, I love the new generation. I think they are kicking ass and taking names. I think they are very much politically engaged, and they're engaging on activism on TikTok and stuff like that. And it's incredibly inspiring and super cool to see. And they have very, very high bullshit detectors because they know nothing but recession. They know nothing but war. They know nothing. So I think a lot of them are well aware of the crumbs. I mean, notice they're not saying, hey, the IRA bill as a whole is just totally great, because they probably are aware there's a ton of poison pills in that thing. It makes millions of acres vulnerable for drilling now. There were tons of poison pills in that thing, but there were a few crumbs, and they're like, okay, these crumbs are good. They also know that 10 grand is a crumb. So they're just like, okay, we know that most of this is happening because of loud movements that are demanding more than the bare minimum, but are still just kind of getting the bare minimum because you have two parties that serve Wall Street. So that's why the young people aren't giving the Democratic Party credit, because they know better, and good for them.
And I want to add this too, this young generation, they're also like, why are we waiting for the Democratic Party to give us table scraps? Look what they've done. They've unionized over 200 Starbucks nationwide. I mean, that's all young people that work at Starbucks.
Right.
It's not people in their 40s working at Starbucks by and large. It's people in their 20s or teenagers in some cases. So they're just like, and they just figured that out because they just looked at their phone and literally were like, how to start a union at Start. That's how they did it. They didn't like wait for the Democratic Party and Nancy Pelosi to give.
No, they didn't. They didn't. They didn't even wait for the NLRB or major unions. In fact, you know, if you look at how some of these newer unions formulated, they went to larger unions and asked for their support and help and didn't get it. So you're not wrong on that. These are, so what I'm hearing is these are half measures. They're not enough to get these young Democratic leading voters to actually go out and go to the polls because they realize that, yeah, I do support these lukewarm measures. I do. I'm glad that you forgave some of the debt, but it wasn't enough to really motivate me to vote. So what sort of becomes the question is what areas are voters that are going to go vote going to be looking at? Is it going to be the overturning of Roe v. Wade? If you're very motivated by that, you're going to go out and vote. You're going to vote for the Democrat no matter what, because that's an important issue for you. Or is it going to be on issues of the economy, where, staring down the barrel of inflation? Obviously, income inequality hasn't abated. It's gotten worse. And both parties are to blame for that. But the unfortunate reality is the GOP somehow always musters to win that argument for reasons I can't understand. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, again, it's because the GOP always wins that argument typically when it comes to the economy, because when the Democrats are in power, they don't do anything about it. I mean, the last recession we had was under George Bush's last term. Obama gets sworn in and, he gave $1 trillion and there were still 6 million foreclosures. And again, as Ron pointed out, these kids saw their parents' homes get taken away. And so the Democrats have been getting by on just saying, we're not them.
Yeah.
That's their whole platform.
The other guy? Yeah. Have you seen the other guy?
And so my guess is, the Democrats are going to just try to lean on Roe v. Wade. You got to vote for us for Roe v. Wade, which might be successful because even though these kids are aware that Nancy Pelosi backed Henry Cooler, the anti-abortion Democrat, they're aware of all this stuff now. So I don't know. It'll come down to the economy and Roe v. Wade. And
I agree.
And if the Republicans have a better economic solution, which they'll propose on paper, it won't be a real solution because both parties are awful, but they might win a lot because people will just go, well, at the end of the day, I'm hurting financially and I got to vote for what's going to save that.
Right. Well, I think if we're talking young people, I think a lot of the young people, especially like the more politically engaged young people in the country, I think a lot of them, they're kind of looking beyond electoralism. And when they are looking at electoralism, they're looking at a lot of local things. That really echoes true here in Los Angeles. I mean, one of the biggest local movements going on right now is Kenneth Mejia's push for city controller. And hopefully he's going to pull out a victory here. That's all young people who made that happen. That was young people mobilizing, knocking on doors, organizing virtually, organizing in person, doing stuff on TikTok, raising enough to have these billboards calling out the overbloated budgets. That was all young people in their 20s that made that happen. You can go to, I believe it was Iowa was the state, but there was that woman who got elected to city council. She was 27 years old running on defunding the police, So I think that young people, they really are seeing how the system is not working for them because they have no choice but to see that. If you're paying attention to what's going on, you're seeing what's put in front of you, a climate collapse, a horrible economy. I mean, you're getting scraps at best. If you want an education, you're going to be in debt for a lifetime in most cases. I mean, they're seeing this. And so they're kind of looking outside. I think that, yes, Roe is a big thing. Absolutely. But I don't think the solution that they're eyeing is like, oh, well, we just show up to vote once every 2 years in the midterms and the presidential and we'll be good. I think what they're doing is they're going, okay, we have to mobilize to make sure that whoever needs, health care or an abortion, can find a way to do it, whether they live in California, Alabama, or anywhere in between. I think that's what these young people are doing. And again, I'm thankful for it.
Indeed. So let's look at the abortion issue in this Teen Vogue article, because they do address this directly. Abortion remains a central issue in the midterms for women. In our first vibe check, abortion was one of the most important issues for young voters, and that's still the case. 74% of respondents cite the rollback in abortion rights as one of the reasons they think the country is on the wrong track. The end of Roe v. Wade has made 64% of young voters more motivated to cast a ballot, and 6 in 10 surveyed voters say they want to support a candidate in November that supports abortion rights. It's worth noting that there is a striking gender gap in the results. While 76% of women say the country's changing abortion laws will impact them, 54% of men say that this will not impact them. 55% of women are very or somewhat concerned that they will have an unintended pregnancy and not be able to access abortion care, while only 27% of men are worried about that for their partners. What do you make of that?
I mean, it's going to be a central issue. Obviously, this is a big thing, but it's really, I mean, the Democrats. I don't know, because the as we were talking about, the young people are aware how the Democrats could have codified, could have done. I mean, they're aware of all this. They're aware of Hillary Clinton picking Tim Kaine. They're aware of all of this. So I think at the end of the day,
why are men less concerned about this? You guys are guys.
Was this young men? Like, this was like the young men.
This is still the same.
I think maybe some of them need to have a little more life experience then, if I'm being honest. I mean, because look, here's the thing. Things like Planned Parenthood, which again, I mean, that would be like a whole separate discussion to have a conversation around Planned Parenthood, because I'm glad that they are doing what they do in our current society, but they're also against single payer. So, but anyway, putting that aside for right now, these types of health centers and stuff like that, less than 3% of what they do is abortion services. Most of what they do, is just general health services. Yes, a lot of it for women, but definitely for men too. If you need an STI screening or whatever else. So I think that, to just be like, well, I'm not a woman, so this doesn't really impact me. Well, it does impact you. It impacts all of society. And even if you really are convinced it doesn't impact you, you should still be concerned about it, because it's really freaking messed up. So, I mean, maybe they were just saying, oh, well, it might not impact me personally, but it's still a big deal. But I think that's a little short-sighted even in itself, because no, it could very well impact you personally.
Indeed. Yeah. So the next section kind of addresses what they think about the Republican Party. Also bad, not shockingly. But, a lot of times people look at these polls and they say, they want team sports, right? They look at something and say, like, well, they don't like the Democrats, so they must like the Republicans. Not the case. I would say the vast majority of Americans, including those under 35, like Graham was saying earlier, are disillusioned by how messed up the system is. It's not serving anybody except for the plutonomy, and they are feeling it on the daily. So this section, 3/4 of respondents believe it's likely that Republicans will pass a national abortion ban if they gain control of Congress. And 63% think the party will also outlaw certain forms of contraception like Plan B and IUDs. Young people also say a GOP-controlled Congress will make it harder for people with whom they disagree to cast a ballot. So that's voters' rights, obviously. 60% will cut taxes on corporations. These positions are out of line with the kind of policies young people say would make them more likely to back a candidate, including supporting abortions, Medicare for all, obviously a big one, refusing to take corporate PAC donations, and legalization of recreational cannabis. So the thing I think of is the fact that the Democratic Party has, for the most part, not pushed for Medicare for all. There are Democrats that do support Medicare for all. Obviously, we all know who they are. But when it's really, gotten time to put your foot to the pedal, it's dissipated. We saw it happen in California. We saw it happen on the national level. I think is one of the main reasons that the DNC put their thumb on the scale against Bernie Sanders, because he supported it. So they see a disconnect here. These are the things that they want. And the lukewarm measures that the Biden administration have offered are better than nothing, yes, they'll take them and they'll say, yes, I like that. But it's not going to be enough to motivate those that are sitting on the fence. And in my opinion, that's very dangerous for the Democrats. It is the non-voters that determine the election.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Graham, you first.
Yeah, and both parties actually want a large block of non-voters because it's easy to manipulate a small group of people into voting for Coke or Pepsi when you give the and part of the problem, I mean, we have to look at is within the context. I mean, I appreciate what Vogue is trying to do, but it's still a mainstream media outlet that helps feed the two-party, the duopoly thing in America. You just have to pick a team, the red team, blue team. I mean, it comes down to everything. That's why Americans start fighting so easily about everything. I mean, everything becomes down to us versus them. Are you team Moderna? Or are you team ivermectin? Like everything had to come down to a team, and
which is ridiculous. All of these things require nuance.
Yeah, and you can't have nuance when you have just two corrupt parties and a media that pushes this narrative. So it's really, and the other thing should be noted too, and I don't know if it's in this article, but young people since 2016 have had the highest percentage of people enrolling in either the Democratic Socialists of America or just openly calling themselves socialist. Right. So you have a lot of people, young people, who are like, I'm done with this. And I don't know that a Vogue poll or any mainstream media outlet poll is going to be able to capture that because even the polling questions are skewed. It's like, are you red or are you blue? That's the polling question. And what about all the people like, I'm not voting for either one of them, like
you don't think all the young socialists are reading Vogue? You don't think? I thought all of them were like, I mean, Karl Marx was on the cover a couple months ago, wasn't he? I thought.
Touche, Ron.
Yeah, Teen Vogue, as we always know, is a hotbed of socialist issues. All of the Vogue outlets are very much about anti-capitalist, workers' rights, socialism.
Can I say randomly, Teen Vogue?
What would Eugene Debs think of this bathing suit? Find out on page 35.
Workers of the world unite around a $500 purse.
Okay, but seriously, randomly, Teen Vogue sometimes publishes pro-socialist articles. Is kind of
I appreciate them doing this. I do.
I get
having a little bit of a laugh, but
we can make fun of Vogue. It's totally okay to make fun of Vogue.
It's totally okay.
Whatever journalists over there, my guess is, and I don't know, this is purely a guess, are socialist lefties that are sneaking stuff in.
Yeah.
In a system, they're not having a writers meeting and the head editor's like, where's all the socialism articles, guys? Like, I think something is happening where they're sneaking one in, or their boss goes, all right, I'll let this one in, but then I need 5 more articles about dieting.
I just wonder how hard they're gonna push. Like they might have something in the wings where it's just like, don't give away our secrets. We're working on this Lucy Parsons designer bag. Don't screw this up for us. We got.
I think like they're
killing me.
Yeah, they're sneaking these in, man. Like, hats off to the people whoever's okaying it, whoever's writing it. Hats off. God bless you, Teen Vogue. But, if we were to go through on a weekly basis what Teen Vogue and regular Vogue are putting out there,
it's pro-capitalist makeup tips. I totally get it, but that's why every time one of these articles comes out on Teen Vogue, I'm always kind of like, that's surprising.
Yeah, sandwiched between a cologne, a perfume page that you can rub on your neck, and a body shaming young women thing. There's some socialism in there. Like that's fantastic.
It's so funny. All right. Enough of the Teen Vogue. It's killing me right now. I want to turn to the adults in the room. Adults in the room. All right. So this is a USA Today article that also did some polling. obviously different outcomes, different group of voters that they ask questions of. So what was interesting from this article, if Colin wants to put it up, is that if you're looking at the economy as being your deciding factor on how you're going to vote, you're going with the Republicans. And I want to talk, let me read some of this, and I want to talk about that for the second, because it kills me that the GOP, that is also part and parcel to the problem, in many ways has more wealthy elites catering to corporations in it, manages to get working class individuals to back them when it comes to economic issues. All right. With the midterm elections less than a month away, a new USA Today analysis of political ad data shows Republicans dominating on issues of the economy and immigration, while Democratic candidates are doubling down on abortion and health care. In October, Republicans outmessaged Democrats roughly 2-1 on the economy, while Democrats have 8 times as much messaging on abortions as the GOP, according to USA Today's analysis of ad impact data. So basically, the Democrats are running ads on abortion, and the Republicans are hitting home on the inflation. Democrats are also outperforming Republicans on messaging on healthcare and COVID-19 by a factor of nearly 3, the analysis revealed. Ad impact tracks political ads on broadcast television for congressional, gubernatorial, mayoral, and state legislative races. The analysis is used as a list of words for each issue supplied by USA Today to calculate the monthly share of ads mentioning each topic as a proportion of all ads. All right, so I want to scroll down to this graph. Topics mentioned by party in 2022 political ads. So here you can see the blue is the Democrats, the red is the Republicans. These are the top ones: abortion, public safety, economy, guns, health, immigration. So really the big disconnect, the two, and I think these are the most important ones, you guys can chime in on what you think, but I do think that abortion and economy are the 2 issues that are going to dominate this midterm election. And the disconnect on the economy is surprising. I know that they always do, but I would think by now that folks would be awake to the idea that the GOP is not necessarily better on the economy just because they're not Wall Street-backed liberals. What are your thoughts on this?
I think it shows how sophisticated the marketing team is.
Okay.
I mean, both these parties spend a lot of money on branding and marketing, just like a big corporation would. So, neither party cares about the working class American. They don't care. The Republicans are better at masking it. They're just better. And
they are.
Both parties are very good at getting people to vote against their own interests. And the Democrats use typically identity politics to get people to vote against their own interests, but the Republicans are very good at using, Second Amendment and family values to get people to vote against. Even though, like you said, the Republicans get just as much money from Wall Street and big corporations. They use that quite well, and they very, very, in the late 70s, early 80s. The religious right made a decision to try to take over the Republican Party, and they were very successful at it. So what they've done is the Republican Party, in conjunction with some of the evangelicals and now the big corporations, have tied in this, Bible, apple pie, Second Amendment, working American, while the liberals are just handouts for poor people who don't want to work hard or whatever. They've done very effective at that messaging, and that's why they're able to trick a large percentage of the American population into voting for them. But both parties are good at tricking people. That's what they do.
Well, right. It's just wild to me that the Koch brothers, hang on, Ron, the Koch brothers, who that is in the working class thinks the Koch brothers gives a shit about inflation, income inequality, or any of the issues affecting the working class. Like this, carry on.
That's the effectiveness of both parties, because there's awful people like the Koch brothers involved in the Democratic Party as well. And, like people defend Nancy Pelosi, even though she's worth over $100 million, which there's no way she got that without corruption.
Fair, but then wouldn't you expect this graph to be more equal?
Yeah, no, it shows you. And again, it goes back to what we've been talking about it's so the pick one team is part of this, because it gets you to believe, this party's good for that, and this party's good for this. And even though they're both awful at everything. So that's what that chart says to me.
Well, I think what that what it also says too is that there's been such a successful brainwashing of the American people. I mean, the fact that it's just like, what are you going to do for the economy? It's like we always, why are people first asking, what are you going to do to make our lives better? It's what are you going to do for the economy? Because people have been successfully brainwashed that when the stock market's doing good, it somehow translates into their life. Guess what? It frickin' doesn't. It never did. So you have the Republicans who all of their economic ideas are beyond ridiculous. It would never work in any society in a million years. But their opponents are the Democrats who have no ideas whatsoever. So it's bad ideas versus absolutely no ideas whatsoever. Pick your poison. And then the whole like protection, that's code for cop worship, which they each stumble over each other to talk about who worship cops the hardest. We really love cops. We want to fund the police. Don't forget about us. Meanwhile, what are police actually doing? What are police really set up to do in the United States? Protect the powerful. That's what they're set up to do. I mean, this is just total empire behavior, but it translates into political messaging. So it is successful marketing that is on top of successful brainwashing. Like, yeah, these are two key issues because it's been force-fed to voters that those are two key issues. At the end of the day, it's not going to make your life any better in any way whatsoever. It's not going to put more food on your table. It's not going to get your kid to be able to go to college. It's not going to get you to be able to see a doctor when you're sick. But those stock market numbers, I'm telling you, that's it's all going to get better once they're better. Once the elite, who we actually care about and who this country is actually for, once it's fine for them, it's going to trickle down to you. I know we've been saying that for 40 years, but it's going to happen after November. No, I swear.
There's no trickle down. That was always nonsense. Really, what we see time and time again is a circle of power and money getting ever tighter, right? It's like a spiral. So gain more power, we can change legislation to keep more money. Gain more money, we can use that money to buy more power, more bot seats in Congress. It's a vicious cycle that has been spinning tighter and tighter now for a good 30 or 40 years, which is why we're at where we are today, where you can't pay rent on minimum wage. I mean, it's absolutely insane. And then now, of course, they need the police to protect their private property because there's so much poverty out there and crimes associated with the poverty. And I don't see relief in sight. I don't see either party trying to correct this problem, or let alone address that it actually exists, unfortunately. Speaking of, it's time to talk about AOC. All right, so AOC has had two bad town halls in the last couple of weeks. She's using this time away from Congress to spend time with her constituents. I actually applaud her for doing that. More Congress people should be doing exactly that. That is what you are elected in office to do, to support and listen to your constituents, whether it's good or bad. So two instances here. I think most people saw the one that was going around last week. It was a LaRoche-based sort of I don't even know what you would call this. Should we just play the video in case people haven't seen it? Colin, it's the one last week. It was LaRoche.
Congresswoman, none of this matters unless there's a nuclear war, which you voted to send arms and weapons to Ukraine. Tulsi Gabbard, she's left the Democratic Party because they're a bunch of war hawks. Okay? You originally voted, you ran as an outsider, yet you've been voting to start this war in Ukraine. You're voting to start a thermonuclear war with Russia and China. Why are you playing with the lives of American citizens? You're playing with our lives.
There will be no neighbors if there's a nuclear bomb. You voted to mobilize and send money to Ukrainian Nazis. You're a coward.
So I have some mixed thoughts on this. Some of the points being made, I absolutely totally agree with. Some of them I don't. I mean, if you're holding up Tulsi Gabbard as the person that is actually anti-war, you're wrong. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't associate with Tulsi Gabbard in any way, shape, or form. I mean, she's a complete sellout. She's now a Republican, I guess. She's just, chasing clicks and votes and money.
Graham, she's a strong independent that just happens to be campaigning for a bunch of Trumpers. That's all.
Listen, she's
right-wing cult and gets money from Modi. Other than that, boy, she's a real lefty.
She's also voted to fund many of these things as well. I don't understand how people ignore that part of the equation. I understand that maybe back in 2016, when she was making speeches about regime change, she made sense. I agreed with a lot of the points that she made back then. She was right. But when it comes to putting your money behind your mouth, she has not delivered either. So if you think she has delivered while you're criticizing AOC, you've lost me. Even though you might be making good points.
Yeah, I don't. That doesn't. Yeah, I know that's where that young man made a mistake. I would just stick with the legitimate criticisms that he also made, and the second guy made, of just she is backing all this Ukrainian. I mean, every time we hear like, oh, how are we going to pay for Medicare for all? There hasn't been one single debate. I mean, that $378 billion climate bill, that's 10 years. So $37 billion a year for 10 years, which is nothing. That was a fight back and forth. It took weeks and whatever. Boy, Ukraine needs money. Boom. They get it whenever they want it. I mean, they've gotten 70 some billion. I mean, the day it was announced that it would take $3 billion to fix Mississippi's water, we gave an additional $3 billion to Ukraine on that day. And nobody said boo. Nobody said, how are we going to pay for it? And AOC is another disappointment and a complete. When she got elected, I'm sure like you guys were like, this is, oh, here we go, change. She was calling out the corruption of the Democratic Party, and that lasted about 14 months. And then now it's Mama Bear, and she's just stumping for the Democratic establishment, which is pro-war, which is pro-Wall Street, just like the Republican Party. I'm glad, again, back to our initial segment, I got credit that these young people who probably were excited about her are calling her out. And I hope there's more young people that do that rather than this is another dumb thing about America. And this is how sophisticated the propaganda is. America is one of the only places where people feel some sort of personal connection to a politician they voted for, and they get mad. They take it personally. You're criticizing my politician. No, that person doesn't care about you. And if you voted for AOC, if you live in her district, and why people like the three of us are disappointed, because we all helped campaign for her in a certain way. We all talked about her on our YouTube shows. We all were like, she's big. I have numerous videos where I'm like singing her praises. So when she doesn't deliver and she starts voting for wars and bailout packages and transferring money to Wall Street, then you should be mad at her. I always tell people, I go, why are you mad at Mitch McConnell? He's never promised any lefty anything ever.
Neither know who that guy is. Yeah.
So you should be mad at the politicians that say they're going to do this. I mean, we could all show video clips of all AOC's campaign and I'm going to fight for Medicare for all. And then she doesn't. So she should be held accountable. Hats off to these people for doing that. And I hope, but it's, you're climbing up against she's my hero. She's my AOC, my squad, America's a stupid cult full of ridiculous jackasses that follow politicians and billionaires like
they put them on pedestals. I agree. It's bizarre.
Yeah, well, I think it really does speak to, I mean, looking at, all of this, it really does speak to the hyper tribal times that we're in, where it's like, and especially when it comes to AOC and then just the squad in general, because people have very strong responses because they're not delivering on what they were elected to do. Right. And they're not really, they're not really trying. I mean, they're not using the leverage that they do have, and that is worthy of criticism. So you have like these hyper tribal sects of where there's one tribe that is just like, don't criticize them. There are leaders, there are rulers, and you can't, if you criticize them, there are allies. They'll just say goodbye to us. And it's like, well, what are you talking about? We're the people who got them elected. If we don't criticize them, guess what?
Because we gave it to them. Exactly.
Yeah. And guess what? If you just kind of like, just let it slide and just don't hold them accountable for anything, you're just grooming the next generation of Biden, Clinton, Obama. Like that's just what you're setting up. On the same note, it's like you have the other extreme side that it's like, they just go scorched earth on AOC for all of societal ills as if Congress was just hunky-dory before she showed up.
Yeah,
and that's ridiculous too. As somebody who fights for policies, I would rather deal with an AOC than a Mitch McConnell 100% of the time. However, when people who campaigned on being allies are not being allies, they're who you have to confront first. because I know Mitch McConnell's not an ally, but AOC campaigned on being one.
That is absolutely a fair analysis of this. Speaking of which, let's turn to the next video that just happened where, so this is an interesting video. You've got multiple things going on there. There's some Tina Forte people in the audience holding up Tina Forte signs. So she's the person running against her. She's a very right-wing extremist Trump supporter. But let's play this video.
Alone in that assessment.
Very classy. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
I mean, so right off the top, I sort of have to laugh because she's dancing to them, chanting AOC has got to go. I understand sort of why she's doing that because she sees these Tina Forte folks in the audience. They're holding up Tina Forte signs. So she's probably thinking like, these are not my people anyway. But here's the thing. I'm guessing that some of those people might have one time been her people. There are definitely her people of some sort also in that town hall meeting. And she still has to like answer to people that didn't vote for her. Part of your job as a congressperson isn't only representing the people that voted for you. It's representing everybody in the district. And that means listening to what they have to say as well. So, and if you disagree with those issues that they're bringing up, then you talk to them about it. But this sort of just sort of fell apart into this crazy scene. What are your thoughts on this?
This is the clown show of American politics right there. You saw it right there. Like, I agree. AOC and any politician needs to listen to people in her district that didn't vote for her or don't agree with her. But also that group of people was not there to have some sort of discussion.
No,
we just started banging drums and chanting like they were at a sporting event. And so it'd be one thing if one of those people stood up and said, hey, Congresswoman, we don't agree with you for these, and these reasons. What do you say about that? And then AOC tried to duck that question. That'd be one thing. But if they're just going to sit there and go, blah, 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 I mean, that's just America. Everybody just going, I'm right, like a bunch of goddamn 5-year-olds. And that's why this country is going to go belly up.
I can't even figure out what half of their issues are. I tried to watch the longer version of this and I still don't know what they were upset about. So no, you're not wrong, but this is what things have sort of just fallen apart to. This is like the normal scene. You're not wrong on that. And it's really disturbing that this is where we're at with politics.
Well, and I think it goes both ways though, because I mean, yeah, like chances are, I mean, I don't know all those people who were there, but I get the vibe like they were Trumpers. So I'm sure I disagree with them politically. And I'd imagine their frustrations with AOC are much different than mine. That being said, like, I actually don't think it was a good look for her to be dancing in the face of constituents. If a bunch of lefties were protesting a Ron DeSantis town hall and he was dancing, would how would you feel about that? I would feel like this is a circus and this is just so freaking annoying. AOC is not an influencer or personality, no matter how hard the landscape of American politics tries to make that. She is a congressperson, and people in the United States Congress are among the most powerful people in the frickin' world. So there's definitely a little bit of a deal with it peasants vibe going on there, which, I have no use for. I mean, I think it's like describing this as like just a circus of American politics is absolutely right on. So, it's kind of sad to see it's gotten to this point. But it has. And I wish I could say, I mean, look, when you look at the squad as a whole, and it's just like, okay, well, what's the worthy criticism here? Because it's just like, okay, they campaigned on these policies. They're really not going to the mat for them. Well, what does that mean, Ron? Because they're outnumbered and most people don't support those policies.
Right.
You're right. And I've never denied that. Here's the thing, though. So how do you start fighting for them? You gel as a unit. You vote as a block. You move as a block. That's how it works. In other countries where there's more checks and balances and they have more parliamentary style systems, usually the socialists and the communists are outnumbered. but they work as a block for the policies they want to see. So the other parties have to go to them. Unfortunately, we have this bullshit duopoly. But if you have people that are actually trying to infiltrate and are actually trying to agitate, they have to move as a block. So the other members of the duopoly, whether it's Wall Street Team R or Team D, needs to go to them. And when we are in a moment where it's pretty much neck and neck, 6 people makes a big frickin' difference. So if they were working as a unit all the frickin' time, there would have been some different stuff being signed. But time and time again, whether it was the Iron Dome or this war budget or that war budget, they never acted as a block. There was always just enough no votes or just enough present votes. So they're playing it the company way. And that ain't what we need.
Ron, you're not wrong. And the other side of that, too, is that there is an attitude that comes from the mainstream Democrats that are in charge that we don't need your votes, is what they say to the leftists in the party. But time and time
they've been saying to us for 100 years.
Yes, but you know what? Here's the thing. They need to court those voters, because when they don't, they do end up sometimes losing elections, and important ones. And I don't know why they haven't learned their lesson. Voters aren't obligated to give you their vote. Voters, they need to have their votes earned, right? And I think a lot of the Democrats lose sight of that, and they're not courting the non-voters as well. I think part of Bernie Sanders' success was that he did bring in people that normally wouldn't vote because they liked his messaging and he was appealing to them. He was listening to them, trying to earn their votes. So I think there's 2 sides to that coin. I think your point is exactly right. There's very little coalition building going on between these 2 fragmented sections of the Democratic Party. I think that the progressives in the Progressive Caucus need to hold out more of their power and not give it up so easily. And
They're useless. The Progressive Caucus is the most useless thing I've ever seen in my life. Like,
well, you know that to get in, you just have to have progressive car insurance. That's what a lot of people don't know. That's all it actually means.
That's all it is. They're just the good
you look at some
insurance.
of the people in that thing, and you're like, Progressive Caucus, really? You're in there? Okay, that's interesting.
Right. All right. So a third of the actual, like, there are some legitimate progressives in there, but you're not wrong on that. It's the same thing in California with their Democratic caucus. But, you know, the point being is that coalition building that you see in a parliamentary system is necessary in order to form a government, right? We don't need that to form a government here in the United States. But the principles that you bring up can be aptly applied, I think. That makes sense.
Well, it absolutely can. And that's why I wish, like, in the long term, I mean, this is why I wish we could expand beyond the duopoly. I mean, this is why I want Third and other parties to have a seat at the table. But for that to happen, like, the rules need to significantly change. And you know, the oligarchy doesn't want that.
No, they do not. They definitely, they want to maintain power. The oligarchy is in both parties, the plutonymy is in both parties, and they will do anything to maintain those power structures within each party. So you're right. All right, Ron, I want to turn now to some of the digital rights things that you have on the list this week. There's some big ones. Which one do you want to start with?
Let's start with cops being cops. This was going on in Louisville. This was so Colin, if you want to pull that up, there was a cop out in Louisville who was using this data technology. Now, they tell us that they need stuff like facial recognition software, and they need all these other things. They need that Ring to turn over all the cams to law enforcement because it helps them catch the bad guys. Now, there's no evidence that has ever happened in the history of ever, but there's plenty of stories like this, like an ex-Louisville police officer who was using law enforcement tech to troll for nudes. He was trying to hack sexually explicit photos from women. And here's what he did. We don't have to go through the whole thing. I'll summarize it. He was working with a hacker. So he legit had a hacker on his team. And he would kind of search for information. And then when he saw like a woman that he liked or that he might be interested in, he would have them hack their Snapchat, hoping they had some nudes. If they did had some nudes, he would contact them directly and blackmail them and say, hey, I'm going to send this to your employer and your coworkers and your family and blah, 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 unless you give me more nudes. That was this guy's MO, and he did it for a while. And you're thinking, gee, man, I bet he was a good cop before then. And he just somehow became one of those bad apples we hear about. No. Before this, he was under discipline because he would go around in his unmarked cruiser car and throw slushies at people for no frickin' reason. So this is a great guy who got a badge and a gun. And this is what he was using this technology for. And all the more reason, folks, we need to have encryption across our DMs. So please go to Make DMS Safe, which means Make DM Safe, and sign that petition, please, because this is what they're doing with our privacy.
Yeah, the Fourth Amendment has been really destroyed post-Patriot Act in many ways. This is just one more example of it. And, Palantir, the software that they use is also very, law enforcement uses across the board, is very invasive. All right, what's the next one we have is, what is the Biden making history?
Biden is making history at his inaction to confirm Gigi Sohn to the FCC. And so the FCC is currently in gridlock. There's 2 anti-net neutrality heads or, appointees, and there are 2 pro-net neutrality commissioners. So 2 anti, 2 pro commissioners. Gigi Sohn would be a pro-net neutrality commissioner. That's what Biden promised. And it's been 2 years. 2 years. She still hasn't been confirmed. Well, here's part of the holdup. First of all, Biden is not really a big net neutrality advocate. That was just one of the concessions he had to make in the Biden-Bernie task force, was that he'd be good on digital rights and he'd be pro-net neutrality. So he didn't make that concession. He's like, here's the appointee. I'm keeping my promise, but I don't really care if she gets appointed or not, so I'm not going to use my pulley pulpit. You look over at the Senate, and you have Chuck Schumer, who is conflict of interest 101 when it comes to conflicts with big tech. So we're feeling the effects of that, folks. And I want to call it, if you could pull up that article about the households paying different prices for internet. There was actually this study that came out recently, and this is something they can get away with in a post-net neutrality world. They surveyed a bunch of different cities, and they're finding that different areas are paying the same price for internet, but they're getting much different service. And the places that are getting much slower service are poorer neighborhoods, neighborhoods that have more people of color, lower incomes. I mean, you see it right here, 70% white residents, median household income, $63,000. They're getting the decent service. Median household income, $23,000, 1% of white residents, they're getting the lousier service. They're paying the same price. So this is just them price gouging consumers where they think they can get away with it. They're saying, oh, well, like poor people, they're less likely to complain. What are they going to do? We'll go ahead. And these are all the cities where stuff like that's going on. Looks like Los Angeles is among them, Vegas, Seattle, Kansas City, Detroit, Michigan. And it's 4 different cable companies that are doing this. Colin, can you scroll up? I think it lists them like a paragraph or 2 up, but it's AT&T, Earthlink, and there were 2 others among them. But AT&T is the main one. But they're literally screwing with your speeds.
Verizon, Earthlink, AT&T, CenturyLink. Interesting.
CenturyLink, yes. Verizon, CenturyLink, Earthlink, and AT&T. Thank you. So those are the 4 companies doing it. And this is something they could just get away with easier in a post-net neutrality society, because we don't have federal net neutrality. There's nothing from stopping them from doing this. And the FCC is in gridlock. So when we talk about this stuff, there's a freaking reason for it, folks. So please go to battleforthenet.com, sign the petition to demand action on Gigi Sohn's appointment.
I just have a question on this, Ron. I'm noticing that all of these providers are not cable, but the other. Is that something to do with it?
Wait, what do you mean? They're not cable, but
like Spectrum is cable. It comes through with the cable. AT&T uses the fiber. Is that part of the reason?
Oh, I don't think so. No, I mean, whether it's like fiber to the home or, I mean, this is just sort of like a strategic decision they're making. The delivery mechanism doesn't really matter. I mean, if anything, fiber should always be faster because it's like the best tech. But yeah, I mean, it's not. I mean, this is just all politics.
Oh, and in fact, if I scroll down the article, it actually says that fiber can be hundreds of times faster than legacy broadband, but that doesn't mean that legacy networks cost hundreds of times less. So, wow, that's really messed up.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So we got to fight back, folks.
We got to fight back. All right. And then your last piece, I think you had one more.
No, I think that was it. That was it for this week.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
What are you working on, Graham?
Well, currently I'm on the road right now. So I've got live shows tonight, October 20th. I'm in Madison, Wisconsin. Tomorrow I'm in Waterford, Michigan, just north of Detroit, the 21st. And Saturday, the 22nd, I'm in Cincinnati. And then Wednesday, the 26th of October, I'm taping my first ever comedy special at the Zanies in downtown Chicago. And so if everybody goes to GrahamElwood.com, you can come out, and my special is very political. Both parties are bad. I make fun of the whole system, and I'm really excited about this special. It's material I've been working on for a while, and so please go to GrahamElwood.com, and I hope you can come out to one of the shows that we're doing in Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, and Chicago.
Excellent. So let's read some of the super chats. Ron, will you do us the honor?
Yeah, let me go ahead and start here. So Gene, what's up, Gene? Love you guys. Thank you so much for that, Gene. Gene Geneve. I hope I'm doing that name justice, but thank you very much for that. Presence, what's up? What we need is for all these non-voters to pile in and vote third party. I'm with you. That might actually disrupt the system. Not voting accomplishes nothing. I do agree with that. I think that, I think that voting is only one tool in the toolkit for change, and it's often an over-amplified that one. You know, I do feel that way, but I also feel like not doing it doesn't really prove anything, because they would just love. I mean, everyone's like, well, if none of us show up, they'll have to start caring. No, they freaking won't. You know, most local elections across the country, it has 27% voter turnout. You know who loves it that way? Real estate developers. That's who. They don't give a hoot how high our voter turnout is. You know why? Because we have a media who never talks about it anyway. So, you know, like, our elections are corrupt to the gill, but, you know, I think by not showing up, you're sort of giving them exactly what they want.
I agree.
Instead of making them earn it a little bit. So thank you for that. Presence, I'm with you. Climate Crisis Dragon, what's up? The problem is that right now at this moment, people aren't seeing the results of student debt relief and prescription drug cost reduction in their wallet yet. Yeah, I hear you. That is true. That's very fair. I do think that it doesn't go near far enough. For most people that have a lot of student debt, 10 grand is like barely scratching at the interest. So yes, it is better than zero, sure. But he could forgive all of it with a stroke of a freaking pen. And
yeah, that's the argument,
generations of people out of debt.
Banksters, if they did it for Wall Street banksters, why can't they do it for students? I mean, there's definitely an argument to be made there.
I'm with you. And we got Roger Meadows. What's up, Roger? Hope all is well in New York. Yo, Ron, what up? Speaking about the youngins, this is the perfect opportunity to introduce them to the power of ballot initiatives. They are primed and ready to vote based on policy, not R&D. You know, I've been on all you guys who live in these blue states like California to file ballot initiatives for state versus versions of Medicare for all. Public banks provide pathways for co-ops to grow and proliferate, outlaw private equity from owning housing and hospital clinics. I'm with you, Roger. Usually whenever I look at a ballot, I'm excited about the initiatives on it and a couple local things and nothing else. That's the case this time. I mean, honestly, like it's like, I can't tell you. There's some people federally who I would like to see win, but none of them are in my, you know, like, I can't vote for them. I'm not in their district. You know, I'm excited about my state assembly district person, which I consider quasi-local. And then I'm excited about, you know, being able to vote for Kenneth Mejia for controller, you know, and stuff like that. So, and then some ballot initiatives. So, you know, that I'm totally with you there. And I think that's all of it. Colin, did we cover the supers?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
right.
That's all of them.
Party.
Right on. All right. So I want to thank Graham for joining us today for the live stream. That was a lot of fun. You always make me laugh. Yeah. Everybody should go see your shows. You're a funny guy. I've seen you live in person. You're very funny.
Shave your knuckles for Justin.
Boom.
And Ron, good seeing you back again 2 weeks from Italy.
No, It's good to be back. Thank you. And I'll let people know that I have a couple things coming up. And on January 28th, I'm going to be in Tucson, Arizona. Tickets are available for that now. It's a stand-up show, and we're going to show my short film Loner, which has not been released to the public yet. You can get tickets now, and if you use the promo code Lucy at checkout, you get a discount. Because
All right,
I'm
Lucy.
doing an early bird special. So use the promo code Lucy at checkout for cheaper tickets. So don't wait, Tucson. And then I'm also going to be in San Diego, February 17th, 18th. You can find all information and tickets at ronplacone.com.
And we got that in exactly an hour. That is impressive. So now it is time for the right-wing insanity report. Everybody stick around for that. This week on the show, I am speaking with Andy Campbell. Andy Campbell is a senior editor at the Huffington Post. He covers right-wing extremism. And his new book out is We Are Proud Boys. In the book, you will there's new documents that have not been released yet, all kinds of great stories. He interviewed lots of folks, including Gavin McInnes. So stick around. I speak with him for about an hour about his new book. Tina-Desiree Berg reporting for Status Coup News. And this week on Right Wing Insanity Report, I'm very excited to have a special guest with me. His name is Andy Campbell. Not only is he a senior editor at Huffington Post, but he is the author of the new book, We Are Proud Boys. I just finished reading. It's a great read. If you don't know a lot about the history of where they started from, what kind of compelled them to use political violence as normalized political discourse, this is a great read. So welcome, Andy. I'm glad to have you on the show.
So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So right off the bat, I wanted to ask you, when did you first become aware that the Proud Boys were an entity? For me, it was like 2017. I'm curious to know when you...
Yeah, I mean, it was about early 2017. I mean, but through 2016, we were covering increasing acts of violence at Trump rallies. I was a national crime reporter, so I was covering, mass shootings prior to that. But during Trump's rise, there were all of these new groups that were showing up at MAGA rallies. There were kids draped in weird internet Nazi regalia like Kekistan flags and Gab stuff. And so we started looking at these groups and, sussing out who were the most important ones. The Proud Boys immediately showed themselves to be concerning because these guys didn't want to be anonymous. They wanted to tell you their names. They wanted to talk to the press. And most of all, they wanted to be lionized for the violence. They have a number of members, as you know, who have nicknames based on, the acts of violence that they've committed. And so this was super concerning. That was about early 2017 is when they started showing up at MAGA rallies and really making a name for themselves. And so covering them ended up being a good bet because, of course, they've been in orbit of so many acts of political violence since then.
So many acts. And it was really interesting because 2017, Trump had already won the election. Generally, you see rallies prior to an election to help your candidate of choice get elected. But this was a new phenomena for me, seeing, Huntington Beach, Berkeley, Portland, all of these locations, Beverly Hills, became locations of just weekly rallies after he won presidency. And they all started coalescing around various ideas. You mentioned Kekistan, which is a word I have not heard in a while. Let's talk about that because I think a lot of people have no idea what Kekistan is. 4chan, Pepe the Frog.
This all of these, this memeology that came from the dark corners of the web, like 4chan. The Republic of Kekistan was a sort of like Nazi meme. Where they created this new country for the 4chan kids. And this kid that I saw was wearing a Kekistan flag as a cape. That flag was actually a German Nazi war flag.
That's
but instead of red, it was green. And in the middle where the swastika should have been, it said Kek. And so we saw all of these types of groups. And like you said, they were out there showing force way after their president had won for them. These guys realized through Trump that they were allowed to come off the internet and into the real world. They saw Trump as their guy, the guy who would push their ideology.
And they weren't wrong. So Kekistan, and it reminds me, Jack Posobiec, I can never say his, thank you. I can never say his name right. I recall him doing a pro-Kekistan rally with Richard Spencer in Washington, D.C., where he was sort of defending this idea of Kekistan as an area where you could go for free speech, but it was really white supremacy.
Absolutely. And the Proud Boys, too, are rooted in white supremacy. These guys, like Posobiec, are really, really good at positioning what they do as something more political and politically minded rather than Nazism and white supremacy. I mean, if you can convince a swath of Americans that you're out there in the street fighting for patriotism rather than misogyny, bigotry, and white supremacy, then it's a lot more palatable to the Americans. And that's why people like Posobiec are still around and connected to the upper echelon of the GOP right now.
That's right. Completely connected. Roger Stone, we can go through some of that in a minute. But it's amazing that they are so successful about reframing white supremacy, white nationalism as something more kinder, more gentler, what I sort of call the suit and tie Nazi crowd. And I think that's by design. We had Proud Boys that were in Charlottesville at the Unite the Right rally. And a lot of people don't realize that. Fraternal Order of the Alt-Knights. Like, this was Kyle Chapman, who now runs a Telegram called Proud Goy. He's a full neo-Nazi. Enrique Tarrio was there with him. They engaged in a lot of political violence. So those roots of white supremacy are definitely ingrained in who they are. And it's surprising to me how many, maybe not so many now, but how many Americans did view them as just, they're just a drinking club. They're just a little conservative.
Right.
But that was...
To your point, the law enforcement community still believes that they are what they say they are, which is a fraternal drinking club. Not only after January 6th did the DHS and outgoing officials say, oh, we thought they were just, a drinking club that got out of hand from time to time. But just last week, it was revealed through the January 6th committee hearings that the
Secret Service?
Secret Service. I was
going
to say
that was wild.
The Secret Service, yes. A memo went out that, saying that the Proud Boys don't engage in violence, so they're not really somebody we have to worry about, when we know time and time again that that's what they do. And on top of that, you talk about the white supremacist background of these guys. I mean, Gavin McInnes said in his show when he was creating the Proud Boys in, the 2016 era, anyone can join the Proud Boys, including people of color, but they have to recognize that white men have an outsized role in the success of the West. So there's white supremacy at the basis of all of this violence.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the whole idea of Western chauvinism, right? West is the best is the West. Right. That's like the rhetoric. In the book, you talk about Portland as being an epicenter for their political violence. I would agree with you on that. I think there's been multiple failures of both government and law enforcement in Portland. And you described some of that, but it became a location where Proud Boys from across the nation would travel to settle their political differences with fists, with guns, with knives. Bear mace became a thing. I even saw wasp spray one time. So talk a little bit about some of the failures that you think brought so much violence to Portland.
Right. This was the battleground, not only where they could sort of casually go in and commit violence, but it was also the way in which they and Trump positioned Antifa as the big, bad, scary boogeyman that the right should be worried about, and served as the justification for the Proud Boys' existence. So they would go in, create ostensibly a MAGA rally, wait for counter protesters to show up, beat them into the submission alongside local police, and then claim that Antifa started it. And Trump, of course, ended up joining in on that and sending in federal troops to disappear protesters in the street during the 2020 BLM rallies. Now, there are many failures in Portland that sort of highlight the failures at the national level as well. One of those is the failure of law enforcement to not only recognize the problem, but respond to it. I was on the ground in Portland for many of those violent rallies over the last 6 years, and police would necessarily stand with the Proud Boys at their back and fire munitions into crowds that honestly weren't just Antifa. They were locals. They were like grandmas holding signs, and they're shooting tear gas into these crowds. Part of that is the Proud Boys messaging. They do a good job of showing, hey, we're here with Blue Lives Matter flags, with thin blue line regalia. We're here to back the blue. And so the police would always point their munitions at the other side, which may have been saying, fuck the police, right? So there's a problem there. There's also a problem with Proud Boys who are law enforcement officers.
Yeah,
many of
100%.
those. And same with Oath Keepers. At the end of the day, the Portland higher ups, the mayor, the governor, didn't respond to it because they characterized what the Proud Boys were doing as a free speech issue and not an issue of violence and discrimination, which is exactly what it's always been.
And that is indeed the case. The crossover from other right-wing extremist groups was definitely present there. And and we've seen it not just in Portland, but everywhere where local law enforcement do turn their backs on the Trump supporters and fire, less lethals, not just tear gas, rubber bullets, whatnot, into BLM or anti-fascist protesters. I've seen that so many times. And in fact, Andy, I remember one time I was covering this protest, and the guy that had the Trump, do you remember that Trump float thing that was traveling around the country? I think he was from Michigan originally.
Yes.
So he was standing on that, and he had a handgun that he pulled out of his pocket, and he was sort of waving the handgun around. And the police none of them were facing the Trump side. They were all facing the counter protesters. And I was like, there's a dude with a handgun behind you. You might want to turn around and check that out.
Right.
But it's just, it was just sort of how it was. I think things have changed a little bit post January 6th. The last protest I covered, they faced both sides. So
Right.
Slight change there, but
There's a slight change. The issue is that even today, following January 6th, you have law enforcement that doesn't know what to do when it finds out it has a Proud Boy within its ranks. Last week in Chicago, they just announced that a Proud Boy officer won't be penalized because it's not illegal to be a Proud Boy. When again, this is an issue of discrimination. Functionally, in the street, a Proud Boy cop is no different than a Nazi cop because they still believe that, political violence against the left is in their rule set. They have white supremacist tenets. And so what is that? How is a black person going to see justice when a Proud Boy cop is on the other end of a gun? I mean, that's just not going to happen. And so police departments have got a lot to do in terms of rooting out this problem and then responding to it for sure.
Right. No, you're not wrong. And even the FBI recognizes that there are connections between right-wing extremists and local law enforcement. It's been a perpetual problem. And apparently they're not ready to deal with it yet. I know we have several Proud Boys that were here in local law enforcement and at the time, back in 2017, 2018, they weren't embarrassed to be Proud Boys. You're right. They wanted to be known. They wanted their names out there. And so you would go to their, Facebook profile and you would see that they were a cop and they had, a 4th degree Proud Boy tattoo. So, and there's a bias that goes with that, and that needs to be recognized.
Absolutely. And it's all over the military as well, which is
100%. Yeah, military is a big concern, also with neo-Nazis. So it's really clear at this point that January 6th was pre-planned. I don't think that's up for debate. You have in the book a document that sort of spells out how the Proud Boys had these tactical teams that they were going to put in place on January 6th. I don't think, even though they were trying to be that organized and maybe they were acting like a mercenary force, I don't think they're quite up to speed capability wise, thank goodness, to be that. But their intention was definitely there. Walk us through those plans because they're pretty crazy.
Yeah, so the plan that I got a hold of was sort of mirrored the Enrique Tarrio rhetoric prior to January 6th, but this planning document was for an event in NYC on January 10th. Obviously, it fizzled out because of what happened at January 6th, but it mirrored kind of how the Proud Boys were planning and getting ready for civil war on January 6th. This plan had them, it named officers who would be standing in different parts of the city, waiting for anti-fascists to show up, calling into their squadron, sitting on different parts of the city and, making phalanx positions. And none of this Spartan warrior stuff ever plays out in the field. The Proud Boys' primary tactic is go in a big group, find the smallest group of anti-fascist protesters that you can and beat the crap out of them and get away before police can catch you.
And do it while drinking.
Right. But it did. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, ripping lines of Coke too. I mean, these guys are
they're all cokeheads
when they go out. Yeah, absolutely.
It's true. Like we could talk about that in a second, but I've noticed that you can tell that they're all aggressively coked up.
And they have no issue admitting that. I mean, this is a fraternity in the sense that they are drunkenly walking down the street and waiting to fight anybody that they can. But the document showed not their tactical prowess, but how much planning goes into this stuff. And we've seen time and time again throughout the years. I also, was given chat logs for another event in 2018 where they're, holding up their guns, trying to figure out how to get weapons inside places that don't allow them, what weapons they can bring, how they're going to attack people. These guys plan everything. And surprisingly, still to this day, they plan it all on Telegram and other chat rooms that are definitely being infiltrated by the feds and people like me.
100%. And
they like to tell on themselves.
They do. They absolutely do tell on themselves. Listen, you mentioned some of the misogyny that the Proud Boys engage in, and that's definitely part of their tenets, right? They're very misogynistic. I recall one time I was covering one of their events, and one of them says to me something like, "Do you even have a degree in journalism?" And I said, "I have a master's degree." And he's like, "Nah, that's in women's studies." So like, no matter what your response is, they're going to find a way. And later on, I recall in that day, one of them got up there and made a speech about how so many of their members were looking for wives and they wanted housewives. And I'm like, has it occurred to any of you that the reason you can't find a wife is because of the things you say and do?
I'm really glad you brought this up, because they are obsessed with the sort of testosterone fueled violence that people like, Tucker Carlson and Joe Rogan push. They're basically saying this is the end of masculinity. Feminism is winning, and please buy this protein powder, by the way.
Right.
The Proud Boys are all ingrained in that, and they believe, they have these weird rules. I'm not sure if your listeners know about the second degree of being a Proud Boy, which requires
the serial.
That you not. Yeah, there's a serial punching thing.
Oh, no, this is the not masturbate one? I can't forget which way they go.
Both are in the second degree. You're absolutely
right.
Okay. So the second degree rank of the Proud Boys requires that first you are surrounded by other Proud Boys and punched until you can name 5 breakfast cereals. This is supposed to gear you up for fighting. It actually looks really embarrassing. You can find this video on YouTube of this initiation ceremony. But the second part of the second degree is that you cannot masturbate unless you are within several feet of a woman. And so you can imagine what kind of horrifying situations that creates. But they believe erroneously that this raises your testosterone for the fighting. And so it's all rooted in this sort of misogyny. Now, the other interesting facet that I found is, women in this space. I didn't realize until writing this book how many women are working to thwart, in the activism, research, journalistic circles, working to thwart extremists, mostly anonymously and mostly without any, semblance of kudos thrown their way. Right. I spoke to a woman anonymously, I call her Ashley, who infiltrated the women who sort of latch on to the Proud Boys, and she created a character for herself to infiltrate as a mole, she described as, this bimbo with vocal fry, and she loves Kim Guilfoyle, and she hangs out with the women who hang out with the Proud Boys, so that then she could get close to them and sort of give video and other information back to her activist circles. But what's so interesting about that story is that I asked her, weren't you worried creating this fake weirdo character that you were going to get caught and hurt? And she was like, no, actually, because the women who were attached to the Proud Boys also had these fake characters because they believed that those were the kinds of women that Proud Boys were looking for.
Right.
Ultimately, though, she never had to worry about any Proud Boys attacking her, sexually or anything, because she said that they were terrible with women and they were actually afraid to talk to the women sort of attached to their group. So to your point, no, I don't think that they are going to have any luck finding the Proud Boy wives that they're looking for.
No, it was kind of wild, though, to hear this guy up there saying this stuff. And it makes you just think, like, maybe if you just did some, looking in the mirror and figuring out why that is, you would see that the problem is your behavior and your rhetoric. I mean, what woman would want to be married to you?
Right. And the self-victimization narrative is the same in a men's rights activist circle as it is in the 100%. White Lives Matter circles. It's all sort of everybody's out to get me and I need to push back against it.
Right. And a lot of the women that are involved in that circle, like every time I've pulled police reports for some of these, not every time, but a lot of the time, I pulled police reports for some of these Proud Boys, and they've been involved in domestic violence like a lot of the time. It's not shocking. It's sort of kind of checks.
Well, yeah, when your rule set requires that you hate women, generally your personal life reflects that.
Right. So Friends of Stone, I want to talk about this text message group. So Roger Stone apparently had a text message group set up that both Enrique Tarrio and Rhodes from the Oath Keeper were involved in for planning. How did you get, well, you don't have to tell me that. I'm sure you want to protect your source, but tell us a little bit about those text messages because they're very interesting.
Right. Well, Stuart Rhodes, founder of the Oath Keepers, like you said, and Enrique Tarrio had long been, prior to January 6th, in this chat room with Roger Stone, where they were, immediately following Biden's election. Stuart Rhodes writes in this text chat, hey, we need to get something rolling ASAP. We need to get ready for January 6th. Roger Stone never rebuffs that, but this was the chat room in which they're sort of, keeping in contact. At the same time, Roger Stone is keeping in contact with Trump leading up to January 6th, with
Right.
Michael Flynn and other people in Trump's inner circle. And so this was the connection that the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys had directly to Trump leading up to January 6th, yet more evidence that Trump knew what was coming and did nothing to stop it. But also, I spoke to Roger Stone, and I'm actually surprised he speaks so candidly with me for this, because I talked to him in March 2021 when he was still under immense public scrutiny
Right.
for his role in January 6th. And he told me, admitted that he had been advising Enrique Tarrio and the Proud Boys politically and through their crimes over the years. This guy sees himself as a friend and mentor of Enrique Tarrio, who is the one, by the way, that brought the Proud Boys out of Unite the Right and said, we need to be more political or we're going to dissolve as a group. And through Roger Stone, he was successfully able to do that. So what these texts showed is there is a huge connection between Trump's GOP and the rioters that day, for sure.
Oh, 100%. And just the GOP in general, we had some Proud Boys that were serving in various central committees inside the party here in California, and I'm sure that's true across the nation. I also think that they have sort of a newer mandate to get involved more locally in politics. Part of it might be sanitizing their image past January 6th. Part of it might be realizing that they can have greater impact if they do run for local office. We see them at school board meetings. We see them running for school board. What do you think that's about?
Well, like Enrique told me, between his 2 stints in jail, he wanted to make sure that they are getting more political. They're throwing their weight behind agreeable candidates, and this is so that they can normalize what they really want to do, which is that political violence. And it works. I mean, the amount of Republicans who are not only tied to the Proud Boys, but sort of celebrate them as this necessary defense force for the GOP is wild. I mean, people think after January 6th, Enrique Tarrio and a bunch of leaders are going to jail. Well, that doesn't change the fact that the Proud Boys have been on a parade of violence since then and continue to show up wherever Tucker Carlson or Donald Trump point their finger. So the violence isn't stopping. And certainly the GOP has not rebuffed any of these groups. They've only embraced them further. Going into this election and next, we're going to see a lot of political violence because of that embrace. It's terrifying.
I don't disagree. Trump is obviously going to be rerunning for election, barring ending up in jail. I don't see that happening, even though possibly he should be. I think what he's done is worse than anything Nixon ever did, but that's a conversation for a different day. Do you think he would end up pardoning everybody related to the January 6th prosecutions?
He said that, or suggested that he would do that. But Trump, like the Proud Boys and like sort of his entire cadre, is not loyal whatsoever. And so unless he thought that, doing so would sort of rile up his base and make people happy, I don't see any political play for that. But, the people that he is pardoning are people like Roger Stone, who definitely know where the bodies are buried, right? I mean, he's doing full tit for tats on those pardons. And so, unless he believes that he's taking a tank and that he believes that his entire base still believes in the spirit of January 6th, which there's
Right.
evidence that that's true. We'll see. I'm certainly, I could see him pardoning a few of the leaders, many of whom have sort of coalesced in those DC jails and become a mini jail gang of their own.
Right.
It's going to be interesting to see how they come out of it. I mean, regardless if the January 6th defendants are pardoned, I definitely see groups of them sitting on, as a group on Tucker Carlson and being lionized as political prisoners, as they've already done, right?
Oh, absolutely. They're martyrs, right? They're martyrs for the cause. And I believe that is the case. People do think that on the right. They think that these guys are doing a noble deed by, taking the fall. Let's talk about Jeremy Bertino for a second, Noblebeard. He is now apparently cooperating with the federal government on this prosecution. I was surprised when I read the story. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Jeremy Bertino is one of two Proud Boys who, during their sedition trial this December, will, testify against their own, and so it's going to make this case so interesting. But Bertino, in order to get a lesser sentence, presumably, agreed to plead guilty to seditious conspiracy, a very rare charge. I think the last time seditious conspiracy was successfully prosecuted was 1995 against Islamist terrorists who wanted to blow up the UN and other buildings, right?
Right.
So the government is certainly saying this is serious, and the fact that we already have a guilty plea, is going to lead the Proud Boys to believe they're screwed. And certainly, I think the Justice Department wants to use that to get higher and higher. I think that through the Proud Boys trial specifically, because you have so many of them ready to testify against their own, we're going to learn more about that Roger Stone relationship, about potential relationships with Donald Trump, and what they knew and when. It's going to be amazing. Also, Gavin McInnes, founder of the Proud Boys, is going to be a defense witness in that sedition trial. It's going to be a total clown show in December.
And absolutely, I mean, Gavin, he lives for that sort of attention. His recent staging of possibly being arrested during his show and walking out was a prime example of that. I know when I saw it, I was like, I wasn't sure that it was the FBI or law enforcement. I thought it might be a prank. Of course, people wanted to believe it was the and it ended up being a prank. So, I mean, with that guy, it can go in any direction. I was like, I would believe it if he got arrested. I would believe it if it's a prank. Who knows? But, that's sort of the thing that he does.
Right.
The shift to hardcore white supremacy, I think this is real. I do want to discuss it for a second here. Brian James from Ohio, who was associated with the Ohio chapter of the Proud Boys. He's also been associated with the Vinlanders, which is a neo-Nazi organization, with American Guard, another white nationalist organization. Kyle Chapman's another one I mentioned earlier. He's gone full neo-Nazi as well. He's hanging out with these SoCal activist groups. I've seen other Proud Boys that I'm not going to name here in White Lives Matter propaganda videos, so I know that there's that connection there. I think, point being, I think the mask is now coming off. In lieu of after January 6th, I think we've seen a shift towards more extremism. I think a lot of folks believed that when Trump was out of office, a lot of this would pipe down. I've seen the opposite happen, and I think it's very concerning. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, the first of all, the political violence. I mean, the Proud Boys have only increased their events. Now, you're not going to see as many MAGA events until next year after Donald Trump, announces officially his candidacy, but they are instead latching onto all of the GOP's grievances. Over the summer, Fox News was complaining about drag queen story hours and LGBTQ events. And the Proud Boys, and alongside neo-Nazis and other, skinhead groups, are showing up at drag queen story hours across the nation. They're showing up at children's hospitals where trans rights are being discussed, and they're showing up at pro-abortion rallies. So the political violence isn't just, at MAGA rallies, at BLM rallies anymore. It is in every facet of American civic life. And so that's concerning, and that's not going away. It's getting worse. But the white supremacy shift that you're seeing, you'll notice that not only are these extremist groups sort of internally going, it's not so bad that we have Nazis. But the GOP is making that shift publicly. I mean, the things that you're seeing Marjorie Taylor Greene and other polls and pundits say on, campaign speeches right now, it's fully anti-Semitic, it's anti-Jew, it's Trump, just the other day, was it yesterday? Said,
oh God,
told Jews to be careful. I mean, this is a full shift from the GOP, not even dipping their toes in the water or tiptoeing around the idea of white supremacy, but fully embracing it and pushing out and holding this big dial that says white supremacy and turning it, and their crowd is loving it. And so
they're loving it. Yeah, it's scary.
This election is going to show us, whether the American public decides, we're going to go with these Trump endorsed candidates who are just fully tied. Joe Kent in Washington State, for example,
oh my God, that
running
guy.
for a House state. Yeah. He's got connections to Gab's Andrew Torba. He's sent $11,000 to a Proud Boy for consulting fees, fully tied.
Oh, I did know that. He sent $11,000 to, oh boy.
To a Proud Boy for consulting fees, yes.
Which means he's doing security at an event or something.
Sure. Or they're in cahoots. We don't know. But the point is, he's fully extremist tied. He's Trump endorsed. And he seems to be doing well in Washington, which that seat was held by a Republican before. But it's still interesting in such a blue state to see that he's doing so well. So this election is going to show us a lot about whether, the MAGA is taken out of the sails of Trump and company.
Indeed. In a lot of these states, Washington, Portland, California, even though they're technically blue states, inland California, inland Oregon into Idaho, inland Washington, there's a lot of right-wing extremists, anti-government groups, neo-Nazi groups that have set up shop in these areas.
Well, I'm from Washington State, and you go anywhere east of the I-5 corridor, and I mean, my high school, there were high school parties with freaking Confederate flags at them in the woods of Washington State. I mean, you talk about a state that was not involved in that effort.
I believe it.
It is very Trumpian, very racist, and they've got it all out there. And once you leave those big cities, it's certainly, and that's a big reason why the Proud Boys have been able to coalesce around places like Portland. They are just outside of the city, and there are a lot of them. There are Nazi factions out there, all kinds of far-right extremist groups.
100%. And Cliven Bundy's now running for governor. Which is kind of wild.
It's exhausting.
I know. It's exhausting. You can't even keep up with this stuff. I do. Okay, so my favorite chapter in your book, no contest, was your chapter entitled First Amendment. I love this chapter for multiple reasons. Obviously, it personally touches me a little bit, but I think your points are really solid. When you're covering right-wing extremism, there's a balance and a tension there, right? The tension and balance is that you want to try to do your job and be unbiased and give people a fair hearing. But at the same time, you're also up against some really terrible ideology that needs to also be checked. You have to be sort of accountable for what you put into the world, right? What you give a platform for. So I find myself kind of working through that tension quite a bit. I thought your chapter just hit that entire thing spot on, and that you're right in a lot of, things that you say, that there is an accountability there. Like at some point, if something is a lie or is hate speech, it should be checked. It isn't our job as journalists to just say that's fine, because it's not fine. And not every idea should be held as equally viable, right?
Right.
So
Absolutely.
Talk me through a little bit about why you included this chapter in the book.
Yeah, I mean, the worst part of my job as an extremism reporter over the last 6 years is also being finger wagger in chief to other mainstream media sources who don't get it right. And by not getting it right, the media has propelled these extremist groups. And, the classic newsroom wants you to find all sides of an issue. And today, working with extremists, the lazy way to do that is to just go, okay, I'm going to talk to one of the victims of these extremist groups, and I'm going to talk to a member of these extremist groups, and hold those two on the same plane and say, ask them questions. But the problem that gives off when you're giving a segment is that it puts them on a similar plane. I was
Right.
talking to a black professor at UVA following Unite the Right, who was on the phone with an Associated Press reporter who wanted to speak with her, and alongside the interview with her, wanted to speak with Jason Kessler, the Proud Boy white supremacist who organized the thing. And she was like, you want to interview me alongside somebody who doesn't believe that I'm fully human? I mean, there is no reason to give the person we know hates black people and thinks that, you know, they should be exterminated, a platform to spout what they want to say. There's just no reason to do that, and it's hurtful. And so what I, you know, say in my book is best practice is to understand. You have to be knowledgeable about your sources and say, you know, I'm not going to sit Gavin McInnes down in front of a camera and say, hey, are you guys violent? Do you take responsibility for their violence? We know they're violent. They've been on a parade of violence for 6 years. And so I don't need to ask that question. And I know that Gavin McInnes makes a point to lie. He makes a point
100%,
to obfuscate and sanitize himself for the media because he says it on his show. That's what we want to do. And so you just have to be knowledgeable, and you have to accept that you know, sometimes it's okay to be biased as a reporter in the sense that you just know. I some people call it bias. I call it expertise. I know what these guys are coming to the table with. It's racism and lies.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think a lot of the times that a lot of these mainstream reporters for the networks, they don't know. I mean, there's been a whole entire vacuum of reporting in this area from these entities because, well, a lot of times they don't even want to send somebody out to these protests or these events because they're dangerous. They don't want to pay for security. It's more expensive. They'd rather license footage from somebody like myself, right? It's easier for them. It's cheaper. But you're right. They're lacking a very serious expertise. And it's very problematic because when Gavin says, yeah, I don't like violence, I'm just a drinking club, and they don't give any pushback to that, that is it has nothing to do with bias. It's putting a wrong narrative, an untrue narrative into the world. And I think more important than perceived bias or optics is a commitment to veracity.
Right.
Just telling the truth.
And it not only does that put people in danger, but because the media allowed them to define themselves in so many segments over the years, that's the reason why law enforcement believes the same thing. We have to call a spade for sure. Right.
100% agree with you. So I really appreciated that chapter, and I hope that more people read it and maybe have a better understanding of why these two viewpoints shouldn't be treated equally, because it is dangerous and it normalizes a lot of the political violence we're seeing. It has been normalized because of the media. And I think that sometimes they're very happy about having all this Trump stuff on air because it brings them views and they're making money off of it too.
I totally appreciate that, because I wanted this book to be more than just a history of the Proud Boys, but also a primer for everyday people on parsing this extremist world. It's really confusing. And on top of the mainstream media that is just kind of screwing up and not handling them properly, they're also padded by this huge network of right-wing media who is totally promoting them and believes in what they're saying. And so they have they have a full network behind them, and that's terrifying going into this next election.
It is. On that note, can we talk about Andy No for a second? Because I think he's one of the reasons that's part and parcel to the cause. I know that this is somebody who has taken footage from me, other people too, lots of people, edited it to tell a certain story that was not true, made Antifa, anti-fascist, the boogeyman, the bad guys, not showing and it's really problematic. That amounts to propaganda. And the fact that those individuals are treated the same as a journalist would be is really problematic, in my opinion.
Absolutely. At the same time as, people are sort of beginning to distrust the mainstream media, not only because Trump tells them to, but because, the mainstream media is getting it wrong. You have these grifters like Andy No, who are total liars and are using footage falsely to sort of create a narrative for Fox News and the New York Post and other places. Andy No not only lies in his reporting, makes up facts, and sends his followers after innocent people to hurt and harass them. But he, in I believe 2018, maybe 2019, was filmed in Portland, hanging out with Patriot Prayer, a sister group to the Proud Boys, while they plotted a felonious assault on activists there. They carried it out on video. Andy No went on Tucker Carlson that evening and said it was Antifa who started it. And there's video of him hanging out with these guys. There's evidence that he's just, friends and with the extremist groups. And so his work is very harmful, but it's also generally harmful that people sort of see him on the same tier as a journalist when he's just absolutely not. He is a grifter and activist for the far right.
Oh, I 100% agree with you. And there was another instance, in fact, I'm remembering, where an event that I had been at that had become incredibly violent. Tucker Carlson licensed some of the footage, not for me. I would never license my footage to him, but somebody licensed footage to him. And he played just a little 30-second clip from what was ultimately a very violent scenario. 2 people were stabbed. I was hit twice, once by a Proud Boy, once by somebody else. It was crazy violence, right? But he played this little tiny clip and had, he could have invited, a million different journalists there. Andrew Kimmel was there. I was there. A guy from the LA Times was there. There were a plethora of people he could have invited on. Tucker had Andy No come on, who wasn't there.
Right. Well, because Andy No gives him the right narrative. And, the total effect of all this is that the Fox News and their allies like Andy No have successfully created a false image of cities, American cities, on fire. Half of America believes that 2020 BLM demonstrations left, irreparable scars on American cities that are still ablaze right now. When in reality, I believe it was Washington Post ran a study by Harvard researchers who found that 96.6% of those events, thousands of events, had 0 reports of violence and 0 reports of property destruction. Majority peaceful, and yet Fox News and Andy No types would have you believe that the left has totally torn down cities. And again, that creates justification for what the right is doing, which is exactly what they're accusing the left of doing, right?
100%, and they're very good at it. And in fact, I saw Benjamin Patino, who's a Proud Boy. One of his buddies at this particular event I had mentioned, where 2 people were stabbed. One was a right winger, one was a left winger. It was political violence. But I asked Benjamin about the second stabbing, and he's like, there wasn't one. And I'm like, Ben, I know there was one. I saw the guy's wounds. He was bleeding right in front of me. I saw them. I saw it. It's in my video if you zoom in on it. So don't tell me there wasn't a second stabbing by one of your guys. I saw it. And he's like, no, you're mistaken. You're mistaken, right? So, and I know I'm not mistaken. He knows I'm not mistaken, but this is the dialogue that we engage in. But if this had been a reporter that hadn't been there on hand and didn't know, they might take that as verbatim as a fact and report it as such.
Absolutely. And, the other issue is that even if you only take the stuff that's reported, which anti-fascists don't report stuff to the police, so you're not going to hear it from them.
That's right. That's part of it,
even if you take the stuff that's that's actually reported, researchers, law enforcement agencies, even Trump's own heads of law enforcement have found time and time again that the far right perpetrates exponentially more violence, that we are seeing a crisis of violence far exceeding that we've seen for freaking 50 years. And it's only getting worse. And so it's dumbfounding to me that we still try to equalize the leftist violence and right-wing violence. It's dumbfounding.
It is dumbfounding. In fact, one of my favorite go-tos for this is Mike German. He's an ex-FBI agent that was undercover with right-wing extremists back in the 90s. He works for the Brennan Center now, and he talks about this quite a bit. And you're right. Why are we continuing to have this charade that the violence is equal? It's absolutely not. Let's talk about anti-fascism for a second, because I think anti-fascism was sort of elevated to this weird boogeyman degree under the Trump administration. Fox obviously likes to hold them up as the bad guys time and time again. They want to believe it's some sort of an organization, but it's not. There is no organization. These are just groups that have shared ideology. They might, be members of a movement in the sense that they all agree that fascism is the problem, but they all have different ways of going about combating that, whether it's doing online research, whether it's showing up at protests. It's a big umbrella. and it's not what the right has decided that they are. But at the same time, there's not a whole lot of authentic reporting on anti-fascists because a lot of anti-fascists don't want to talk to press. They certainly don't want to provide the police with any details if they are victims of crime. And I've seen them stabbed, but they're not going to tell the police about it. So it's complicated in this sense. What do you make of all of this complication?
Yeah, I mean, it's you are right that sort of, the image that the right has created, which is this balaclava wearing, Molotov cocktail holding protester in the street, is the tip of the iceberg. Now, do militant leftists exist? Absolutely. Have they attacked people in the street? Totally. And there have been, there have been acts of violence that the majority of the left totally decries and says this isn't right for our movement. And this is a self-policing group, right?
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. Yeah.
Yeah, and whereas on the right you have the right sort of coalesces around themselves and circles the wagons around anyone, right. Which is why you have regular sort of conservatives hanging out with Nazis in the street. But that's another discussion. Anti-fascism is this huge umbrella, like you said, and the majority of people doing anti-fascist work are doing a desk job.
Right.
The Unite the Right, after Unite the Right, all of the dossiers and work that went to creating a successful $25 million lawsuit against the architects was done by anti-fascist researchers, local and national, working together. Much of the dossier work done on the January 6th defendants was done by anti-fascist researchers. Right. Now, there are anti-fascists who go in the street. There are anti-fascists who hate a supporter of Joe Biden just as much as they hate a cop or a Trump supporter. And I've spoken to those people. Some of those people have yelled at me and told me to put down my camera. Yeah. And I've had bad situations with them. But again, what it goes back to is that the numbers just don't add up. Antifa isn't going out in the street freaking, working ideologically to attack people and locals. It's just not happening. The numbers don't show it.
It's not happening. Yeah.
And like you said, the other issue is that there is some honest reporting that needs to be done on these groups. I want to learn more, but I think a lot of journalists, even those in the extremism space, hesitate to work on that because any reporting that comes out on that is necessarily going to be grabbed up by the Andy Knows of the world and sort of positioned as further proof that the leftist menace is way worse than that.
Oh, you're not wrong. I'm Antifa press secretary over here.
Yeah. I get called Antifa all the time. Gavin McGinnis told his followers that I'm a mask wearing Antifa, right? Yeah. And it's like it's like ideologically that characterization isn't bad. I don't like fascism.
No, I don't like fascism, but I do think it's funny how worked up they get.
Right, absolutely. But Antifa to the right, even a number of Proud Boys told me anonymously that Antifa really just describes anyone who opposes them. Could be an old man holding a sign. It could be a BLM protester. It could be anybody.
It could be the FBI at this point.
Exactly. Yeah. And anyone Trump points his finger at is Antifa. And that's, they've created this boogeyman and given themselves a reason to go out there and fight, and a reason why the police and pundits are looking away when they do that.
100%. I want to talk about money in the GOP, money in politics, money going to the right-wing extremists from the moneyed interests in the GOP. You talk a little bit about this in the book. I sort of want to make a connection beyond that, though. I believe that we are seeing an increase in fascism in the country because we are also seeing an extreme increase in income inequality in the country. The last time we saw this type of income inequality was the 1930s, not just here, but abroad in Europe. And that led to fascism everywhere. Christian Front in this country, the Bund. We also had a very serious right-wing extreme problem in the late 1930s that doesn't get discussed, that went lockstep with that. So I think that these things are interconnected. And I also think that mainstream political GOP forces are funding a lot of this right-wing violence in the streets. I don't think that's a crazy statement. So what benefits do these moneyed interests have? Not just from the income inequality, that's the obvious one, but from sort of sowing the seeds of aggression with these extremists.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that the people at the top, and Trump is a prime example. That guy has a bunch of money and he ain't giving it to anybody.
He's part of the Placone.
Right, absolutely. But creating this victim narrative allows for people who are totally in a class, in a different stratosphere than their base to say, you're one of me because, these people are coming to get you. Immigrants, Antifa, women, people are coming to get you. They're coming to take your guns. They're coming to take your masculinity. That is a platform by which they can say, you're on my side, even though we are of different class. And so never, the rich in this country are certainly working to foment this violence. But what was interesting about the work that some of the researchers have done, pulling information from the Give, Send, Go campaigns to different Proud Boys after they were arrested.
Yeah, that was fascinating, by the way.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating because many of these people, appear to be poor people who are just throwing $5 or $10 to the Proud Boys. I thought those scrapes would pull out Peter Thiel types sending, $100,000 to the Proud Boys organization. But I was so surprised to see that it was everyday Americans. And that just goes to show you how well the extremist groups have worked with the GOP and sort of created this narrative of what we are doing is patriotic. You need to support that because we are going to save you. Unlike, the police, unlike the left, unlike the crusty old Republicans at the top, we're going to get out there and fight for you. It certainly the money flowing just shows how the right has worked to create a sense of belonging for even poor people who really shouldn't see people like Trump as their saviors.
Also, I was really fascinated by the connection with the Chinese immigrants that are against communism, which sort of ties into this idea, because the other part of the rhetoric that doesn't get discussed a lot, you've been on these protests, so you've heard it, is there is an anti-communist thing that I think even transcends the Antifa thing. Like, they're very much against communism. They think everything, Biden's a communist, I'm a communist, everything's communism, right? They'll throw the communists out of the helicopter, the Pinochet t-shirts. So that's also a thing. So I was really, really enthralled by the fact that these guys were giving Proud Boys a lot of money.
Yeah, it's just regular people from the Chinese diaspora. I think this was a USA Today report that first found this, but a lot of Chinese immigrants are pumping money into these extremist efforts and believe that Trump will, save them from communism. When again, to Trump, communists, Antifa, BLM, all the same thing. I mean, these are buzzwords to them. This is the threats that they are posing barely exist, if at all.
If at all.
The only communist threat that I have is the young communist lawyer that I play Catan with on some weeknights. I mean, like the communism is not actually coming for you.
No,
but Trump has done a good job of convincing them of that.
It's wild. Sure. I mean, even when I confronted some White Lives Matter Nazis on the overpass, they were about to throw a banner over the overpass, a Nazi banner. The guy literally says to me, "Aren't you a communist?" And I'm like, out of nowhere. So I was like, wow, really? Also, this guy's an ex-Proud Boy. So, I mean, it's sort of
right.
And
what would it matter,
together.
right? And what would it matter if you said yes, other than, oh, you just agreed that you are the thing I'm supposed to go kill?
I know, right?
Like,
I was
beyond that, what would that mean?
I don't know. It was bizarre. I just didn't even want to ask. I was just like, no, I'm not a communist. But why are you throwing a Nazi banner over the freeway?
It's actually, well, yeah. And it's scary because of Trump's rhetoric against the mainstream media, increasingly reporters and journalists and researchers in the field are the subjects of violence.
Yeah.
And people were dragged into the crowd on January 6th because people thought they were press.
Right.
The Proud Boys attacked members of the media. In fact,
Yeah.
I spoke to a reporter who was at one of the rallies in December prior to January 6th, who was punched in the face by a Proud Boy after they were chanting "fuck the media," and he said he knew that the far-right violence had been accepted and sort of utilized by the American public, not just the extremist groups, because he got punched in the face and he looks out into the crowd, and there was a woman who he said could have been his own mother standing, with the regular MAGA crowd, and she turns to him and points to him and says, "You deserved that." And he was like, that's when I realized the shift had gone from just the extremist groups to everyday Americans that believe this stuff.
They do believe this stuff. John Farina, who was in the tunnel shooting for Status Coup that day, I mean, he had bruises up and down all over his, like, it was wild. He had massive injuries, but it's sort of become part and parcel to everything we're talking about, because the media, the fourth estate, if you want to call it that at this point, has been sort of normalizing this stuff, as we discussed, not holding up a mirror to that, saying, wait a minute, is this a good idea? Are these guys really having opinions that should have equal and viable attention? And I think the answer to that is obviously no, but that ship sailed, I guess.
Yeah, well, and it's getting to the point now where we're starting to recognize as mainstream media. The New York Times, for example, is getting a little bit better at reporting on it, but we are way past the point of being of needing to just see the problem. We have to freaking respond to it, and so that Congress and law enforcement can respond accordingly, because they are certainly not.
No, they're not. So is there any other part of the book that you would like to mention that I haven't asked you about? I asked you about all my favorite parts. I
think your interview is great. I like to leave people, with the sense that, first of all, like we talked about, the majority of work being done against these guys is being done by locals around you. And it's not just Antifa, it's researchers from your local college, it's journalists, it's people from all over the spectrum. And going into this election, like I said, you're going to see so many extremist type candidates on the board. And so I think it's really, really important that we change the narrative around what activism is, what research is against extremism, so that people can gain more knowledge instead of being scared of being tied to Antifa or, the big scary left.
Right. You know what? That's an interesting point, Andy. Sorry to interrupt you, but I hadn't really thought it in those terms. You're right. Another side of that is that people are afraid of being attached to these groups and being called Antifa. Like, is that going to be tinged against my reputation or something?
Right.
That's a very real aspect of this, I think.
Absolutely, and I think once the majority of people understand that even if you're just an analytical person and you want to look at numbers, that the far right threat absolutely outweighs all other physical violence threats right now, then they can start to understand that when my Harvard professor down the street publishes a thing in Washington Post saying, this is the threat, and leftists aren't the threat, that I can believe that and not see it as some sort of leftist op. We have a lot of work to do in terms of helping people to understand that issue going into this election, because half of the country is going to see an election denier on their ballots this year. And that's really scary.
That is really scary. Secretary of States, governors. Yeah, a lot of these folks that are putting forth this lie that Trump won the election are absolutely running for office. It's something we need to pay attention to. Andy, where can people buy this book if they see this interview and want to read it?
Anywhere books are sold. It's not technically international yet, but Amazon, bookshop.org, or go to your local bookstore. It's all out.
Right on. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate your time. Great book, and we will talk to you hopefully again in the future.
Thank you so much. This was a great conversation. I appreciate you having it.
Hi, I'm Tina-Desiree Berg reporting for Status